Hello. The following is AI translation of historical speeches from dictators such as Adolf Hitler, Gaddafi, Che Guevara, Kim Jong-un, and Stalin. This is for educational purposes. They are not the ideas of thinking AI. Consider leaving a like, comment, and subscribe to Think Inc. AI. Let us together build the Think Inc. AI community, where ideas can be shared, explored, and flourish.
In connection with the Jewish question, I have this to say. It is a shameful spectacle to see how the whole democratic world is oozing sympathy for the poor, tormented Jewish people, but remains hard-hearted and obdurate when it comes to helping them, which is surely, in view of its attitude, an obvious duty. The arguments that are brought up as an excuse for not helping them actually speak for us Germans and Italians. For this is what they say. 1, we, that is the democracies, are not in a position to take in the Jews. Yet in these empires there are not 10 people to the square kilometer, while Germany, with her 135 inhabitants to the square kilometer, is supposed to have room for them. 2, they assure us we cannot take them unless Germany is prepared to allow them a certain amount of capital to bring with them as immigrants. For hundreds of years, Germany was good enough to receive these elements, although they possessed nothing except infectious political and physical diseases. What they possess today, they have by a very large extent gained at the cost of the less astute German nation by the most reprehensible manipulations. Today, we are merely paying this people what it deserves. When the German nation was, thanks to the inflation instigated and carried through by Jews, deprived of the entire savings which it had accumulated in years of honest work, when the rest of the world took away the German nation's foreign investments, when we were divested of the whole of our colonial possessions, these philanthropic considerations evidently carried little noticeable weight with democratic statesmen. Today I can only assure these gentlemen that thanks to the brutal education with which the democracies favored us for 15 years, we are completely hardened to all attacks of sentiment. After more than 800,000 children of the nation had died of hunger and undernourishment at the close of the war, we witnessed almost 1 million head of milking cows being driven away from us in accordance with the cruel paragraphs of a dictate which the humane democratic apostles of the world forced upon us as a peace treaty. We witnessed over 1 million German prisoners of war being retained in confinement for no reason at all for a whole year after the war was ended. We witnessed over 1.5 million Germans being torn away from all that they possessed in the territories lying on our frontiers and being whipped out with practically only what they wore on their backs. We had to endure having millions of our fellow countrymen torn from us without their consent and without their being afforded the slightest possibility of existence. I could supplement these examples with dozens of the most cruel kind. For this reason, we ask to be spared all sentimental talk. The German nation does not wish its interests to be determined and controlled by any foreign nation, France to the French, England to the English, America to the Americans, and Germany to the Germans. We are resolved to prevent the settlement in our country of a strange people which was capable of snatching for itself all the leading positions in the land and to oust it, for it is our will to educate our own nation for these leading positions. We have hundreds of thousands of very intelligent children of peasants and of the working classes. We shall have them educated. In fact, we have already begun, and we wish that one day they, and not the representatives of an alien race, may hold the leading positions in the state together with our educated classes. Above all, German culture, as its name alone shows, is German and not Jewish, and therefore its management and care will be entrusted to members of our own nation. If the rest of the world cries out with a hypocritical mien against this barbaric expulsion from Germany of such an irreplaceable and culturally eminently valuable element, we can only be astonished at the conclusions they draw from this situation. For how thankful they must be that we are releasing these precious apostles of culture and placing them at the disposal of the rest of the world. In accordance with their own declarations, They cannot find a single reason to excuse themselves for refusing to receive this most valuable race in their own countries. Nor can I see a reason why the members of this race should be imposed upon the German nation, while in the States, which are so enthusiastic about these splendid people, their settlement should suddenly be refused with every imaginable excuse. I think that the sooner this problem is solved, the better, for Europe cannot settle down until the Jewish question is cleared up. It may very well be possible that sooner or later an agreement on this problem may be reached in Europe, even between those nations which otherwise do not so easily come together. The world has sufficient space for settlements, but we must once and for all get rid of the opinion that the Jewish race was only created by God for the purpose of being in a certain percentage a parasite living on the body and the productive work of other nations. The Jewish race will have to adapt itself to sound constructive activity as other nations do, or sooner or later it will succumb to a crisis of an inconceivable magnitude. One thing I should like to say on this day, which may be memorable for others as well as for us Germans: in the course of my life, I have very often been a prophet and have usually been ridiculed for it. During the time of my struggle for power, it was in the first instance the Jewish race which only received my prophecies with laughter when I said that I would one day take over the leadership of the state, and with it that of the whole nation, and that I would then, among many other things, settle the Jewish problem. Their laughter was uproarious, but I think that for some time now they have been laughing on the other side of their face. Today I will once more be a prophet. If the international Jewish financiers in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. The nations are no longer willing to die on the battlefield so that this unstable international race may profiteer from a war or satisfy its Old Testament vengeance.
هذول اللي وراهم اللي يقوموا بالعمل هذا يعطينهم حبوب راهو مش بإرادتهم. These are the people behind them. They give them pills. It's not their own will. If everything is not achieved, then we will declare the march. We will declare the Holy March. Yes. Because Muammar al-Gaddafi is a national leader. Millions of people defend me. I am calling upon the millions from one end of the desert to the other. And we will march in our millions to purify Libya inch by inch. House by house, home by home, street by street, person by person, until the country is clean of the dirt and impurities. We cannot allow to lose Libya unjustified and for the wrong reasons. Who would allow that? On my side, I have millions of people and God who has triumphed me against the great power. I have millions, not from the inside, but from other nations. I am calling upon all the millions in the deserts. From the ends of the desert, millions will march. Millions will march, and no one will be able to stop them. Quickly, save yourselves before we begin the march. Tonight will be a peaceful march from inside our cities and streets to save our children and arrest those who harm them. You do this tonight and tomorrow. You go down in the streets. That doesn't work. There will be another march, and you'll know where it comes from. Then there will be the national march, which I will lead. Because Libya is the mother of all nations. Libya is globally recognized. I am staying. Don't let them tell you lies. Me, go to Venezuela? By God. Me, leave the corpse of the martyr Abdel Salam, the first martyr in the war of 1911, and go to Venezuela? By God. And the history records it. Do we leave? We leave the Mujahid Muhammad Abdel Salam and the Mujahid Sheikh Saadi and their corpses by God and leave? You believe that? These are the lies. Didn't they tell you yesterday that Gaddafi is in Venezuela? And here I am, Arabic TV channels are the biggest enemy, and they're on to you. They want you to destroy oil, the freedom, public authority in Libya, because they are jealous of you. Our brothers in Qatar, is this the end of it? Is that the friendship we had between us? You go against us in everything? Instead of standing with us, you go against us. By God, for whose benefit? You regret this when it's too late. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Who are you? It's time to work. It's time to march. It's time to triumph. No going back. To the front. To the front. To the front. Revolution.
Industries of Cuba. I invite you to address the assembly.
Mr. President, distinguished delegate, the Cuban delegation to this assembly is pleased to begin by warmly welcoming the incorporation of 3 new nations to the significant number that discuss world problems here. We therefore greet the President and Prime Ministers, the peoples of Zambia, Malawi, and Malta, and hope these countries join from the start the group of non-aligned nations fighting against imperialism, colonialism, and neocolonialism. We also extend our greetings to the ruling classes of Latin American countries against our revolution. In others, sadly, it's the result of the blinding allure of wealth. As everyone knows, after the tremendous commotion called the Caribbean crisis, the United States entered into certain commitments with the Soviet Union, resulting in the withdrawal of certain types of weapons, which the continuous aggressions from that country, such as the mercenary attack at Playa Girón, and the threats to invade our homeland, forced us to place in Cuba as an act of legitimate and unyielding defense. Did the Americans also think that the United Nations should inspect our territory, to which we emphatically refused, since Cuba does not recognize the right of the United States or anyone in the world to determine what type of weapons it can have within its borders? In this regard, we would only comply with multilateral agreements with equal obligations for all parties. As Fidel Castro said, as long as the concept of sovereignty exists as a prerogative of nations and independent peoples, and as a right of all peoples, we will not accept the exclusion of our people from that right. As long as the world is governed by these principles, as long as the world is governed by these concepts that have universal validity, because they are universally accepted and embraced by the peoples, we will not agree to be deprived of any of those rights. We will not give up any of those rights. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Bhutan, understood our reasons. However, the United States sought to establish a new arbitrary and illegal prerogative, violating the airspace of any small country. Thus, U-2 planes and other types of spy aircraft have been flying over our homeland with impunity, navigating our airspace. We have issued all necessary warnings to stop the air violations as well as the provocations by Yankee Marines against our guard posts in the Guantanamo area and low-flying plane maneuvers over our ships or those of other nations in international waters.
Pirate attacks on ships
different flags and spy infiltrations and saboteurs more in our country. We want to build socialism. We have declared ourselves supporters of those who fight for peace. We have declared ourselves part of the non-aligned countries group, despite being Marxist-Leninists, because the non-aligned, like us, fight against imperialism. We want peace. The new resolve of the American continent. It is embodied and summarized in the cry that our masses proclaim daily as an undeniable expression of their decision to fight, paralyzing the armed hand of the invader, a proclamation that has the understanding and support of all the peoples of the world, especially from the socialist bloc led by the Soviet Union. That proclamation is
or homeland
or a death.
It is the immutable position of my party and the government of the Republic and my unwavering will to proceed with complete destruction. Since then, we have already declared internally and externally that we will no longer make, test, use, or deliver nuclear weapons, and we have taken a number of practical steps. I am ready to sit down with the President of the United States again at any time in the future, and we will certainly work to achieve an outcome that is welcomed by the international community. However, if the US does not fulfill its promise in front of the world and misjudges the patience of the Korean people and tries to impose anything unilaterally and accidentally goes ahead with sanctions and pressure on the DPRK, we may be forced to seek a new path to defend our sovereignty and the supreme interests of the country and to achieve peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. As we have pledged to move forward on the path of peace, we will continue to cooperate with the foreign powers that are part of the military forces of the Korean Peninsula.
It seems to me, comrades, that certain American comrades fail to understand the position that has been created now that the draft of the Commission has been adopted by the Presidium. Apparently, comrades do not fully realize that to defend one's convictions when the decision had not yet been taken is one thing, and to submit to the will of the Comintern after the decision has been taken is another. One might, and one ought to have, criticized and fought against the draft of the Commission if the members of the delegation considered it was a wrong one. But now that the draft of the Commission has become the decision of the Presidium, the American delegates should have the manhood to submit to the will of the collective, the will of the Comintern, and assume responsibility for carrying into effect the decision of the Comintern. We ought to value the firmness and stubbornness displayed here by 8 of the 10 American delegates in their fight against the draft of the Commission. But it is impossible to approve the fact that these 8 comrades, after their views have suffered complete defeat, refuse to subordinate their will to the will of the higher collective, the will of the Presidium of the ECCI. True Bolshevik courage does not consist in placing one's individual will above the will of the collective, above the will of the Comintern. True courage consists in being strong enough to master and overcome oneself and subordinate one's will to the will of the collective, the will of the higher party body. Without that, there is no collective. Without that, there is not and cannot be any collective leadership. I think you will not deny the Russian Bolsheviks' courage, firmness, and ability to defend their convictions. How did any group of Russian Bolsheviks usually act when they found themselves in a minority? Not wishing to break the iron discipline of the party, the minority as a rule conformed to the will of the majority. There have been tens and hundreds of instances in the history of our party when a section of Bolsheviks, convinced that the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party had taken a wrong decision, nevertheless, after discussion, after hot dispute, after defending their conviction, would declare their complete readiness to conform to the decisions of the higher leading collective and carry them into effect. I might mention such an instance which took place in 1907 when a section of the Bolsheviks were in favor of boycotting the Duma, whereas the larger section of Bolsheviks were for a change in policy in favor of participating in the Duma, and the minority unreservedly submitted to the will of the majority. The Russian Bolsheviks would have ruined the cause of the Russian Revolution had they not known how to conform the will of individual comrades to the will of the majority, had they not known how to act collectively. That is how we Bolsheviks were trained, the Bolsheviks who overthrew the bourgeoisie, established the Soviet power, and who are now shaking the foundations of world imperialism. Ability to act collectively, readiness to conform the will of individual comrades to the will of the collective. That is what we call true Bolshevik manhood. For without that manhood, without the ability to overcome, if you like, one's self-esteem and subordinate one's will to the will of the collective, without these qualities, there can be no collective leadership, no communism. And that is true not only in respect to individual parties and their central committees. It is particularly true in respect to the Comintern and its leading organs, which unite all parties of communists throughout the world. Comrades Gitlow and Lovestone announced here with aplomb that their conscience and convictions do not permit them to submit to the decisions of the Presidium and carry them into effect. The same was said by Comrade Bloor. What they said amounted to this, that since they do not agree with the decision of the Presidium, they cannot submit to that decision and carry it into effect. But only anarchists, individualists can talk like that, not Bolsheviks, not Leninists, who are obliged to place the will of the collective above their individual will. They talk of their conscience. But the members of the Presidium of the ECC also have their conscience and convictions. What is to be done if the conscience and convictions of the Presidium of the ECC conflict with the conscience and convictions of individual members of the American delegation? What is to be done if the American delegation in the Presidium received only one vote for their declaration, the vote of Comrade Gitlow, while the remaining members of the Presidium unanimously declared themselves against the declaration of the American delegation and in favor of the draft of the Commission? Members of the American delegation, do you think that the conscience and convictions of Comrade Gitlow are above the conscience and convictions of the overwhelming majority of the Presidium of the ECCI? Do you begin to understand that if each of us starts to act according to his own will, without reckoning with the will of the collective, we shall never come to any decision, we shall never have any collective will, nor any leadership? Let us take any factory or plant. Let us assume that the majority of the workers of that factory show an inclination to go on strike, whereas the minority, on the plea of their convictions, declare against the strike. A war of opinions commences.
As a new war of opinion commences, let us not repeat the same mistakes as our predecessors. Like, comment, and share. Let us together build the thinking AI community, where ideas can be shared, explored, and flourish.